I still remember that day vividly, the day when the sunlight began to disappear, not just from the sky, but from my life. As darkness crept over the walls of our home, and even deeper darkness took root inside me, I was terrified, suffocating beneath a fear I couldn't explain. My peaceful life, once so full of warmth and security, had suddenly turned cold and unsafe. Something was wrong, deeply, disturbingly wrong. I had grown up believing I was lucky. Though I was the daughter of a woman from a previous marriage, my stepfather had always treated me with love and care. He never let me feel the absence of my biological father. He provided for us, protected us, and gave my mother the kind of respectful companionship that women often dream of but rarely find. He was a kind man, gentle, thoughtful, and deeply affectionate. I loved and trusted him completely. But everything changed after my mother died. In the days that followed her funeral, something in him snapped, or rather, something emerged. A version of him that I had never seen before. During the day, he still carried the mask of the calm, caring father, but at night, his presence became unbearable. His eyes changed, his demeanor shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by something cold, calculating, and dangerous. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps he was grieving. Perhaps he didn't know how to cope with the loss, but then came the whispers through the walls. The slow creaking of floorboards outside my door late at night. The way his hand would linger too long when he passed me something. And then, there were the nights when I would wake up paralyzed with dread, knowing that something or someone was watching me from the darkness. The most horrifying part wasn't even the change in his behavior. It was the fact that I had no one to tell. To the outside world, he was a hero, a man who married a widow and raised her daughter like his own. Neighbors praised him. Relatives respected him. They all saw him as a model of compassion and virtue. If I ever dared to speak the truth, no one would believe me. How could they? Even I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And so I remained silent. But the silence became heavier each day. My body trembled with anxiety. My sleep was stolen by shadows. I was no longer safe in the one place I should have been protected. I didn't know who to trust, where to go, or how to survive. My home had turned into a cage, and the man I once called my guardian had become the monster I feared the most. I didn't know it yet, but what was happening to him wasn't entirely his doing. Something far more sinister was working in the background, hiding behind familiar faces, cloaked in false kindness. And it all started with a glass of milk. I began noticing patterns, subtle at first, but then impossible to ignore. Every night, just before the atmosphere in the house would shift and fear would settle over me like a fog, a particular routine would play out. Our neighbor, Aunt Sakina, would arrive right before sunset. She'd smile gently, ask about my well-being, and hand over a glass of warm milk for my stepfather. "It helps him sleep," she would say, like a caring friend helping a grieving man. At first, I didn't question it. Sakina had always been around. She lived next door and had grown close to us, especially after my mother's passing. She'd often stop by in the evenings, claiming she didn't want us to feel alone. My brothers had already left for cadet college by then, leaving only me in the house. So her presence felt comforting. Until it didn't. One evening, I watched more closely. She handed the glass over, but her eyes flickered toward me. There was something too deliberate in her movement, too forced in her smile. A chill ran down my spine. That night, I didn't sleep at all. My stepfather wandered the hallway again, breathing heavily outside my door. I locked it, pressing my back against it until sunrise. By the third night, I was convinced something was wrong with that milk. I remembered the stories whispered by older women, of charms, of jinn, of potions mixed with things unholy. I'd never believed them. Until now. Driven by fear and instinct, I hid behind the curtain near the entrance the next evening and watched Sakina arrive. As always, she brought the milk, but this time I noticed something different, a tiny black vial in her hand. She poured its contents into the glass before knocking on the door. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear her voice. After she left, I slipped into the kitchen and checked the leftover milk in the jug. It was untouched. The only milk he drank was hers. That night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I tried confronting him, asking why he acted so strangely, why he had changed so much. But he looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize. Eyes hollow, expression blank. He didn't answer. He simply walked past me and locked himself in his room. The man who used to call me his strength, who once braided my hair like a father, had become a stranger in his own skin. My instincts screamed that I was running out of time. Whatever was in that milk, it was slowly destroying him. And through him, it was destroying me. But what did Sakina want? Why me? I didn't have answers, just dread. And the horrifying realization that the monster haunting me at night might not even be aware of what he was doing. I spent the next day restless, pacing from room to room, unsure of what to do next. The house, once a place of comfort, had become a maze of silent shadows. Every creaking floorboard, every shifting breeze made me flinch. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about black magic. There was a deeper story buried beneath all of it, a reason why Sakina would go to such extremes. So I began digging, not into her house or her things, but into memories. My mother's stories, the way Sakina used to speak of our family, those small moments that once felt meaningless but now dripped with unspoken resentment. And I remembered the way Sakina had once tried to marry her niece to my stepfather before his marriage to my mother. Back then, it was a small matter, brushed off politely. But what if Sakina had never really let go? What if that quiet bitterness had grown, festering into hate over the years? Later that evening, I watched her again from the window as she walked away after delivering the milk. This time, I followed her. Not directly, I stayed in the shadows far enough that she wouldn't notice. She walked with a purpose, her pace quick, her head low. She entered her house and didn't emerge again. I returned home, heart pounding, and waited for night to fall. The moment the lights dimmed, the transformation began. My stepfather's footsteps echoed through the hallway. I locked my door tightly, but this time, I heard something more. Low murmurs, as if he were speaking to someone who wasn't there. His voice was deep, distant, and broken, as though something else was speaking through him. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to muffle my sobs. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed the truth. So I did the one thing I never imagined I'd have the courage to do. I went to Sakina's house alone. She answered the door with that same fake warmth she always wore. But her eyes, they froze when she saw me standing there, fists clenched, voice shaking. "What do you want?" she asked flatly. I stared into her face and said the words I had been choking on for weeks. "Why are you doing this to me?" She didn't deny it, she didn't gasp, she didn't laugh. She simply narrowed her eyes and whispered, "Go home, before I show you a version of me that you're not ready for." I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand she stop. But before I could say anything else, someone behind me spoke. A voice I knew too well. It was my stepfather. He had followed me, and he had heard everything. I froze where I stood. The voice behind me, deep, steady, broken, was unmistakable. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my breath. My stepfather was standing at the gate, his eyes locked on Sakina. But they weren't hollow like before. They were wide open, full of something I hadn't seen in weeks. Clarity. Awareness. He had heard everything. Sakina's face turned pale. For the first time since all this began, she looked scared. Her mask dropped, and behind it was nothing but cold, ugly truth. She opened her mouth to say something, but my stepfather held up his hand, not to her, but to silence her. "I heard it," he said slowly. "Every word." I couldn't move, couldn't think. I looked between them, waiting for something to explode. He turned to me next. For a moment, he looked ashamed. Deeply, unspeakably ashamed. Then his voice cracked as he spoke again. "I didn't know what I was doing, I swear to you. I didn't understand why I kept waking up with these strange thoughts. Why I felt things I never should have felt." Tears burned my eyes. My legs almost gave way. Hearing him admit it out loud made everything real. This wasn't just something happening to me. It had happened through him, because of her. Sakina tried to walk back inside, but my stepfather blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere," he said. Call your husband, now. She stood frozen. He pulled out his phone and called the man himself. Within 20 minutes, her husband arrived. My stepfather didn't waste time. He told him everything. How Sakina had been drugging him with enchanted milk, how she had used black magic, and how she admitted the reason behind it. Her jealousy, her revenge, her twisted plan to destroy me. Sakina's husband went completely silent, his face drained of color. And then, without a word, he looked at her and said, "You're no longer my wife." Just like that. A marriage ended in the doorway where a nightmare had begun. She collapsed to the floor, wailing, though whether it was guilt or humiliation, no one could say. But none of it mattered to me anymore. I was too numb, too hollow, too tired. The only thing that remained in that moment was my stepfather's voice as he turned back to me. "I can't undo what's been done," he said softly, "but I'll never let you carry this burden alone again. You deserve peace, even if it means I lose you forever." And I knew in that instant that something had shattered in him too. Something he couldn't fix. And neither could I. After everything came crashing down that day, silence filled the space between us. We returned home, but nothing was the same. My stepfather barely spoke. The man who once hummed quietly while making breakfast now walked through rooms like a ghost. I think he couldn't even look at me without seeing the damage, without seeing himself through the eyes of the girl he had unknowingly hurt. And I didn't know how to exist around him anymore. There was no blame in me, not anymore, not after hearing what had been done to him. But forgiveness is not always the opposite of pain. It sometimes walks beside it. He began sleeping in the living room. We hardly crossed paths. I knew he wanted to talk, maybe even cry, but the weight of shame was too heavy. Some wounds cannot be healed with words, and so we lived like two strangers in one house, bound by a past neither of us chose. Days passed like that, quiet, careful, fragile. And then one morning he knocked softly on my door. I opened it slowly. He stood there with his eyes lowered, holding a small envelope. "I've made arrangements," he said quietly, "for your marriage." My heart stilled. "To Shamir?" he added, almost in a whisper. It felt like the ground tilted beneath me. Shamir, Sakina's son, the one person she had tried so hard to keep me away from. The reason all of this had started. "I spoke to him," he continued. "Told him everything. He knows, but he still wants to marry you." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer ache of it all. I remembered Shamir's kind eyes, the gentle way he once offered to help me carry my books, the subtle respect in the way he always addressed me. A part of me had always felt safe around him. "Are you sure?" I finally asked. He nodded. "I'm not doing this to wipe away what happened. I can't keep you here anymore. You deserve a life untouched by all of this. He can give you that." And I understood. This wasn't abandonment. It was a release. A few days later, in the most modest ceremony, I was married off to Shamir. There were no decorations, no guests, no grand festivities, just quiet prayers and the hope for a gentler tomorrow. My stepfather didn't attend the ceremony. He said he wouldn't be able to watch, but he left a note behind. It simply said, "You deserved love, not scars. I pray this is the beginning of your healing." And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel again: hope. The house I entered as Shamir's wife was filled with unfamiliar walls, but not unfamiliar warmth. There was a stillness there, not the suffocating kind I had known, but the kind that let you breathe, let you heal. Shamir didn't try to fix me. He didn't ask for stories I wasn't ready to share. He simply created space. Space for silence. Space for grief. Space for me. He arranged a separate room for me and never crossed the line, even though we were now husband and wife. He would knock softly each morning just to say good morning, then disappear into the day without pressuring me for smiles or conversation. His presence was never heavy, never demanding. It was just there. Like sunlight gently filling a room you thought was lost to darkness. I remember one evening, a few days into the marriage, I was sitting near the window staring at the sunset. He placed a cup of tea beside me quietly. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything," he said, his voice low and sincere. What happened to you wasn't your fault, and I won't be another person who takes your peace. Those words undid me. I looked up at him, and for the first time since everything had collapsed, I let someone see my tears. He didn't flinch, didn't turn away. He just nodded softly and said, "Take your time." And I did. Each day I let myself breathe a little deeper. I walked around the garden. I started writing in my old journal again. I even called my brothers at their cadet college, and for the first time in months, I laughed while speaking to them. Shamir and I began to talk more. Small conversations about books, about food, about ordinary things. And in those ordinary things, something extraordinary happened. Trust began to grow. Not the kind that rushes or consumes, but the kind that rises slowly from ruin, fragile but real. He never mentioned his mother. I never asked. But we both knew we were trying to build something sacred from the ashes of something cursed. Sometimes at night, I would think of everything that had happened. The fear, the darkness, the betrayal. But instead of drowning in it, I would reach for the warmth that was now mine. The safety of a locked door, the comfort of kind eyes, the knowledge that I had survived. And that survival wasn't my weakness, it was my proof. The girl they tried to break was still standing. And this time, she had a future that didn't begin with pain. The days slowly turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I thought I had lost forever. There were still nights when I woke up gasping, haunted by memories that clung like shadows. But now, when I opened my eyes, I found calm instead of chaos. I found a quiet home, a steady rhythm, and a man who never tried to rush my healing. Shamir had a way of existing beside me without invading me. Sometimes we'd eat dinner together, sometimes apart. He left notes when he came home late and always asked before entering my space. He respected my silences and never filled them with empty words. That alone made him feel safe in a way no one else ever had. One evening, we sat in the garden just after sunset. The sky above us was streaked with gold and indigo, and for once the world felt still. Shamir broke the silence. "You know," he said, gently stirring his tea, "I used to wonder if love meant grand gestures, fireworks, dramatic confessions, endless passion. But now I think maybe love is just not being afraid, being seen and still being safe." I looked at him, eyes burning. "Then maybe I'm learning to love for the first time," I whispered. He smiled, not wide, not bold, just enough to let me know he heard me. That night, for the first time, I left my door slightly open. It wasn't an invitation. It was a sign, a signal that I was ready to stop surviving and start living again. But healing is not a straight line. There were moments I still flinched at certain touches, still panicked at loud voices. But the difference was, I didn't carry that pain alone anymore. Shamir didn't just stand beside me. He carried the weight I couldn't explain. He even apologized one evening, not for what his mother did because those were her sins, but for the world that allowed it to happen. He told me, "You didn't deserve any of it, Iram, but you deserve every ounce of peace now, and if I can help build it, even one brick at a time, I will." There was something so steady about the way he said it that I felt the foundation beneath my feet growing stronger. I started to write poetry again. I cooked for him once and saw his face light up like a child. I began laughing without guilt, smiling without fear. Little by little, love wasn't just a word, it was my reality. And though I didn't say it yet, not out loud, my heart had started to whisper his name with gratitude. Shamir, the man who waited. The man who didn't rescue me from the fire but stood beside me while I walked out of it myself. Life had finally begun to breathe again. I started waking up with purpose, not dread. I began taking online classes to resume my studies, hoping to finish what I had paused during the darkest time of my life. Shamir helped me set up a small study corner by the window where morning light streamed in just right. He even ordered my textbooks himself, smiling as he handed them over like a silent cheerleader. We didn't talk about the past, not directly, but the way he treated me, as if I was whole, not broken, spoke louder than any words ever could. But life has a way of testing healing, of sending reminders just when you think you've outrun the pain. One day, as I was returning home from a small grocery errand, I passed by the old lane near our previous house. A voice called out. It was Sakina's daughter. I hadn't seen her since the day her mother's life fell apart. She looked thinner, older, like the weight of her mother's sins had fallen onto her shoulders. Iram, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond. I simply nodded and tried to walk away. But she stopped me. I know you probably hate us, she whispered. But I needed you to know. She's not the same anymore. She doesn't speak. She doesn't eat. She just sits in one corner and stares at the wall all day. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. Just nothing. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ring Shamir had placed on my finger. It wasn't lavish, just a simple band with a single stone, but it reminded me of something I had only just begun to believe again, that I deserved good things. I turned to him and asked softly, "Do you ever regret marrying me? After everything?" His answer came without hesitation. "Never. I regret what you went through. But I thank God every day that I get to be the one standing beside you now." It was in that moment that I realized love wasn't loud declarations or dramatic sacrifices. It was showing up every day, quietly, steadily, without asking for anything in return. A few days later, I found the courage to visit my mother's grave. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I cleaned the headstone, placed a rose beside it, and sat there in silence. "I'm okay now," I whispered. "I'm safe. You'd be proud of who I married." And for the first time in what felt like years, I truly believed it. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living. The days after my visit to my mother's grave felt lighter, like a burden had quietly lifted off my chest. I had finally spoken the words I had buried inside me for so long, and with them, I felt her presence again, not as a painful memory, but as a soft blessing guiding me forward. At home, Shamir noticed the change in me. "You're glowing," he said one morning, smiling as he poured tea into my cup. I laughed softly, brushing off the compliment, but inside, I knew he was right. I was finally beginning to feel like myself again, or maybe like someone entirely new, someone stronger. I started helping Shamir with some of his work, learning small tasks, offering opinions. He listened. He valued my thoughts. For the first time, I felt like an equal in a relationship, not a responsibility or a burden to be managed. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he looked at me and said, "You know, I want us to build something together. Not just a home, a life, a future. Maybe even a family someday." I froze for a moment, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming gentleness in his tone. There was no pressure, just hope. "I'd like that," I replied softly. And I meant it, because despite the darkness I had walked through, I had emerged into a love that asked for nothing but honesty. A love that saw me, not for where I came from, not for what had happened to me, but for who I was choosing to become. There are moments in life that define you, not by what breaks you, but by what you choose to rebuild after the wreckage. Months have passed now. The wounds haven't disappeared, but they've closed. Some days I still flinch at shadows. Some nights the silence still echoes too loudly. But those moments come and go, and they no longer control me. They no longer own my story. Shamir and I continue to grow, side by side. We've planted new things, habits, rituals, small joys, Sunday breakfasts, quiet walks after sunset, shared prayers, laughter that feels real. Slowly, we've built a home not of bricks, but of trust. I sometimes think about how easily my life could have gone in a different direction, if I had stayed silent, if the truth had never surfaced, if I had been swallowed by shame. But I wasn't. I chose to fight back, even if it was through tears, even if my voice trembled. And today I stand not just as a survivor, but as a woman who reclaimed her name, her future, her light. I've forgiven my stepfather, not because he asked for it, but because I refused to let his brokenness define mine. As for Sakina, I leave her story to God. The pain she caused returned to her in ways only he could design. All I know is this: no matter how cruel the darkness, light always finds a way back. And in Shamir, I found not a rescuer, but a witness, someone who saw me as I was and stayed anyway. This is what healing looks like. Not perfect, but finally mine.